farmers in Te Tai Rāwhiti have had more anxious times and are still assessing damage from the heavy rain. Weather bombs like this week's remind them of last year's cyclones and the devastation caused to fence lines, crops and pasture. Tim Jefford farms in Tolaga Bay. His farm was smashed during hail in Gabrielle.
Wife and I were both sitting in bed last night, both feeling like we had knots in our stomach, and yeah, it's sort of a feeling that just you can't really get rid of. It's just when that river starts to sort of get up and community posts civil defence texts go out, and you start worrying a fair bit.
Tim says trees down and slips are the extent of damage to his farm, much to his relief.
Growers have been affected. We've heard about some heavy flooding to a citrus producer, affecting both the orchard and the pack house. Wairoa farming leader Alan Newton says the downpour and flooding this week comes on top of ground already sodden from the wet winter.
About a month ago it turned wet and it just hasn't let up. They're forecasting us day after day with fine weather, and it just carried on raining. The slow, light rain and it penetrating the ground and making things very wet underfoot. It's been very, very warm, and the pasture growth here up until now with this rain has been exceptionally good.
While there are plenty of trees down and surface flooding in the region, one farmer said the death of 3 fishermen during the storm puts damage caused by the heavy rain in perspective. Meanwhile, farmers in North Canterbury say the region has a tinge of green thanks to downpours in recent weeks. The region's been struggling with dry conditions since the summer. Farmers have been dishing out supplementary feed and offloading stock where they can. In addition, Hawarden sheep and beef farmer Dan Hodgen says ewe pregnancy rates have been affected as feed conditions had deteriorated by the time the ram went out.
Generally, I'm hearing most people are sort of 20 to 30% back, even slightly higher in some cases than 30%, which is another big hit you don't need when you're trying to dig yourself out of a financial hole. So that'll create some challenges, but then I guess as well, it's certainly easier to keep a single ewe going than a twin ewe through late pregnancy.
To other news now, and farmers on the Chatham Islands have reverted to mustering stock on horseback after the island ran out of petrol. Petrol tanks ran dry about a month ago, and diesel supplies were running low after bad weather forced a barge to turn around last week. On top of this, farmers have had to cull stock because they haven't been able to transport animals off island as normal since April, while the transport vessel undergoes repairs. Chatham's farming leader, Tony Anderson, says without being able to sell stock, farmers have had no cash flow for months.
All of last year's lambs and calves, once they weaned, they needed to be gone because the capital stock, the mothers, if you like, need that grass through the winter. So all those babies are still here. So it's causing issues on the farm with the welfare of animals. Although we're not in a welfare situation, it is compromising a lot of things. Some farmers have had a lot of surplus cattle that haven't been able to be moved for years because of restrictions on the ship. So a lot of them have had to be put down to allow some feed for younger animals.
It's hoped the ship will leave New Zealand in the next week or so.
Let's take a look at some horticulture news now. And the industry has overwhelmingly voted to continue with an industry levy, 15 cents for every $100 of sales. HortNZ says a big focus will be ensuring growers have fair and reasonable access to fresh water. The blueberry grower Miro is replanting part of its orchard that was smashed during cyclones last year. It's been approved for a $3.5 million loan from the government's North Island Weather Event Fund. Miro is made up of several Māori entities, Hapu and Iwi, and has 10 blueberry orchards in the Bay of Plenty. And the kiwi fruit marketer Zespri says it's on track to reach its record-breaking $4.5 billion sales goal by the end of this season. That's up from $2.9 billion 3 seasons ago.
Not great news from the olive oil industry, though, as many producers have had a horror season, just as they were hoping to plug supply gaps caused by drought elsewhere in the world. Growers in Northland, Waiheke, Auckland and Kapiti have had a good season, but the majority in Wairarapa, Nelson Marlborough and Canterbury are pressing a third fewer olives than last season, and last season was down as well. Olives New Zealand Executive Officer Emma Glover says the later autumn drought, bird strike and early frosts in central Otago have affected yields. She says groves normally producing 40 to 50,000 litres will be down to 30,000 litres. Many growers will be losing money and some may need to exit.
They're not going to keep growing, and because to keep that volume going or to increase the volume, the grove needs to be maintained. But if you've got people going and looking for employment elsewhere to supplement incomes, they don't have the time and effort to put into their grove to prune it and to spray it and to do all the work that needs to be, because there's not a lot of contractors around in our industry. It's very much owner-operated in the grove.
Emma Glover says one bright spot is this season's olive oil is back to having more flavour. Fantastic.
A 50,000-strong petition against the live export trade has been presented to the opposition's Damien O'Connor at Parliament. A ban by the previous Labour government began in April last year, but the coalition government has promised to reverse the ban and create a gold standard of exports. Live Export NZ Chair Glenn Neal says MPI is working on new regulations and he expects further consultation by the end of the year.
Certainly too soon to look into the logistics of that ahead of the standards being set. Yeah, there is a balance to be struck with regulation, that it must be achievable and it must be economic. We must be at world's best practice, not too far ahead of that, otherwise it gets impractical or too expensive. So we're confident that we can keep up with the rest of the world and have a system that Kiwis can continue to be proud of.
Glenn Neal says the ban is worth nearly $500 million in lost GDP and farmers will welcome its return.
And finally, an auction of vintage tractors near Christchurch has had collectors excited this week. 49 of the machines restored by the late Bob Voice are up for sale at his farm in Kirwee. Here's Proctor Auctions Director Ronnie Proctor.
So there's 49 tractors. The majority of them are fully restored, and then there's some that are partially restored and waiting to be restored. There's a nice Field Marshal. I think it's a 1936 Field Marshal. From what I believe, that's the rarest one out of the lot of them, and it's a fully restored one and in really great condition.
The live auction starts at 11 on Saturday morning.
You're listening to Country Life on RNZ National 101 FM.